Well, thanks again, and great to see you tonight. As Andrea said, when I got the invitation to speak here, it was just at a time when I was planning my study tour of Australia and New Zealand. I got a grant from Winston Churchill Memorial Trust some time ago, and the topic that I was exploring, what I was learning about down under, is exactly this: community engagement in design and development. And this is related to my work for the Princess Regeneration Trust and earlier work for Princess Foundation and CABE and other organizations, and I'll talk a bit about that later. So I've got a lot to show you. Let's get on with it. I'll be talking about why I think engaging community is important. I'll be talking about different methods, approaches to community engagement, centered around this citizen participation ladder, and I'll be showing some examples of my work, the work that I've done over the last sort of 15 years or so. I'll talk a bit about the context for all of this in England, and this is about the Localism Act and the community rights in England. And then I will finish with some examples from Australia, New Zealand, and Cuba related to my Churchill Fellowship. So first of all, why I think engaging communities is important. And I tend to use this quote from Churchill, of course. I have to show some stuff, some Churchill quotes, but this is the right one, and it actually explains really well the principle of the physical environment. The design of places that we produce, has a profound impact on social and economic prosperity of places. The way we design and we put together public squares and streets and buildings, the way they address each other, the way the buildings address public spaces, the way we allocate uses to those buildings and spaces really has an impact on our feeling of belonging and pride and identity, on safety and crime in places. It has impact on our access to essential community facilities like schools and retail and health facilities. It has impact on economic prosperity of local businesses or even whole cities and city regions. And therefore I think, because that impact is much wider than just the immediate site or the investor who builds a building or develops a site, that all of those who are in a way affected by these developments should be engaged in the design and the planning of our built environment. And Churchill actually understood this really well. This is a quote from his essay that he wrote about how the Houses of Parliament, specifically debating chambers, should be rebuilt after they were damaged in the war. And he understood that, you know, the specific size and shape of the debating chamber actually suits the type of democratic debate that goes on there and the specific political context in this country. And he's the guy who never, you know, with no expertise in the built environment, in architecture and urbanism, but he understood this intuitively. But very often community engagement in this country and elsewhere is associated with this, box ticking, or in many cases this is about kind of them and us, the site promoter, the scheme promoter, and local residents and businesses who are often feeling excluded and not properly engaged. And there's this kind of confrontational sort of situation always associated with it. I like to use this ladder of citizen participation to explain how there are very different ways of engaging local people in design and development. And it could be, you know, this negative type of engagement, which is about manipulation even and therapy, to sort of neutral ways of just informing and consulting people on schemes that are produced by others, normally design teams and client teams, to ways of engaging where you really have where you're empowering local people, where they're partnering with scheme promoter, or where the powers are delegated to them to take forward a strategy or a development, or where citizens have the leading role. They actually initiate and deliver projects. So I'll be talking about different examples of engagement. And you know, these various ways of engaging people actually reflect how I developed in my professional career and the particular aspects of design and development that I focused on as I progressed through my career. So in the early days, I was really focusing on the product of design. You know, it was all about that design of a building or a space. And then with years, with kind of professional maturity, I realized that actually that design product is very much informed by the policies that we have in operation in any particular place, and also that it very much depends on the process by which we engage different stakeholders and other professionals in generating those design proposals. And ultimately, it's all about the people who will be using that space or that building in the end, or people who are engaged in generating those design solutions, so professionals or the general public. So as I said in the beginning, in the early days of my career, this is all I wanted to know about, you know, that end design. But from sort of 2000, when I started working for the consultancy called Space Syntax, which is a spin-off from University College London, I started looking at different ways of engaging people, and this is by observing them and recording what they actually do in public spaces and in buildings, and that informed the designs that we were generating at Space Syntax. And we developed models for actually simulating what people do in public spaces and in buildings, and then using those models to test design proposals and to be a bit more certain about the sort of the social and economic outcome of our designs. And alongside that, we did the sort of what we call the standard engagement, which is through exhibitions and getting ideas, people's feedback on our design options, getting smaller stakeholder groups to look at proposals, traveling around, making sure that's exposed to a great number of people. I continued this exploration of how we engage people in design and planning through my work for CABE. CABE was the statutory body, government advisor for architecture and built environment, and it existed as a statutory body until 2011. So I specifically looked at that aspect of design and planning when I worked in the Housing Market Renewal Program, which is all about engaging people in the areas in the north, where there were large plans to demolish housing areas, surplus housing, and that's a very sensitive issue, as you can imagine. So it was really important to engage people in the right way. And also I continued that through the exploration of how you engage people in strategic planning, which is very difficult because people can normally relate to quite local issues, but it's about how do you get people interested, how do you get them to engage in strategic planning projects. And we looked at a number of case studies across the world, and all of that work is still available on CABE archive site. We looked at a number of case studies, and you can see them here, and actually developed a method where that strategic planning is based on participatory workshops and looking at engaging different levels of stakeholders in strategic projects. And we were lucky that we were able actually to test this approach to community engagement in a number of projects across the country. This was the day when we had the regional planning in England. We had joint planning units in quite a number of regions and sub-regions, and this work was done in Northamptonshire, where we worked with the joint planning unit. This is still going on, this work, and this was early days when we engaged a large group of stakeholders to look at various growth scenarios, because this is still a growth area at the edges of the commuter zone around London. And then I continued this exploration at a different spatial scale, looking at neighbourhoods that are engaged in neighbourhood planning, and this started in 2011, shortly before the new Localism Act was introduced in England. And this act introduced new statutory rights for local people to produce plans for their neighbourhoods, plans that will be part of the policy framework in that local authority. This was a significant new set of policies and initiatives introduced by coalition government, and I was leading a program at the Princess Foundation where we provided support for neighbourhoods. Almost 50 neighbourhoods across England engaged in this kind of neighbourhood planning based on this new legislation. And we helped neighbourhoods a lot in terms of reaching out, engaging people, organising exhibitions, gathering ideas, supporting local people, local professionals who are engaging their neighbours, and then organising, running, facilitating these design workshops where we actually generated planning proposals together with local people. And we were there in an enabling role not leading the process, but actually allowing local people to contribute ideas and to generate planning strategies. And the results of this were these planning frameworks like this, and we kind of summarized that in our report. Again, there are a number of case studies that you can find on Princess Foundation website, neighborhood planning section. So most of that work that I've just described kind of falls in this category, I think. And neighborhood planning moves to this area here where powers to produce statutory plans are delegated to neighborhood groups. In parish areas, they are parish councils, town councils. In urban areas, they are called neighborhood forums. But the work that I'm doing currently for the Princess Regeneration Trust actually goes even higher. And this is about projects where community groups are in the leading role. They are initiating and delivering projects themselves. The trust has been set up over 18 years ago, and it has a dual charitable object, and this is about preserving important historic buildings and sites, but also making sure that the projects, regeneration projects, deliver benefits to local people, social and economic benefits to local people, and we tend to work in more deprived areas of the country. And we do that in three ways. We in some cases acquire sites and deliver regeneration projects ourselves. In some cases we work as advisors to other public or private or third sector clients. But importantly, we use our charitable donations, the funding that we have to support community groups that are taking on historic assets and delivering projects themselves. And projects vary by location, size, and nature, from small building like this in the north of Scotland to an open air swimming pool in Bath, where a local group is trying to revive this, regenerate this, and reopen it as a community leisure location. But also places like this in Grimsby, in the north of the country. There are many places where we have this great industrial buildings that are now derelict or underused. So this is a former ice factory in Grimsby. It used to be the biggest ice factory in the world during the Victorian times, and the local group is now trying to regenerate this building and turn it into a mixed-use community hub, including arts uses, including new offices, workshops, a microbrewery, new cinema, etc. So these are very complex projects, and community groups need a lot of support in order to bring them forward. And we actually tend to work in very sensitive and deprived areas, as I said, and this is one of the examples in Northern Ireland, in Belfast, where we worked in an area between the Protestant and Catholic communities and we helped a local community group to convert this old school into a community centre, which is now thriving. And this is kind of illustrates the type of project that we get involved in. Alongside that, we try to put together a fund to actually make some money available to groups that are taking on this project. And we do a lot of training, capacity building work through the program that I run. At the moment it's called BRIC, and then we do training through conferences and workshops, and also do mentoring, one-to-one mentoring for the groups that are taking on these difficult projects. And it's important to say that there's more and more of this stuff happening, because with less money available in the public sector, at least in England, and I'm sure it's the same in Wales, local authorities and even private owners are now in many places happy to give the sites to local groups to run the projects and to convert them into something that will be of community value, because the level of investment that's needed in order to bring those old buildings and sites back into use exceeds the actual value that you will get at the end of the process. And public and private sector clients aren't able to seek grants from many of the foundations and trusts and public sector grant-giving bodies, such as Heritage Lottery Fund. So they give sites like that to community groups, who are then able to seek those grants and to match fund and to actually turn them around and reopen these buildings and these sites. So there are many projects like that around the country. So we're working throughout the UK or on projects like that. This is one example from Wales, and a big part of what we do through this program and other work, our project work, is to actually help local groups engage with the wider community. And this is exactly what we've done in this place in Wrexham in North Wales, where we ran recently in February. We ran a master planning exercise where they engaged a larger group of people from this tiny place where they used to have a major steelworks that closed down in the early 90s, and now they're trying to convert this big old steelwork site into a new hub enterprise and visitor attraction because there is a fantastic fossil forest as part of this site with trees that are apparently 300 million years old. So they're trying to create something quite unique, but it's a group of local people, ex-steelworkers, so they need a lot of support in order to do something as complex as that. And as part of that, we're producing all sorts of design options and the design ideas. We are like a drawing arm for them. We are guided by their aspirations, by their ideas, and we're helping them realize those ideas. And the context for all of this, and why I'm exploring community engagement, why I think it's important, is the fact that since November 2011, we have the Localism Act in England, and we have these new community rights introduced by the government. The first one is the community right to plan, which is all about giving local people the right to produce statutory policy documents for their neighbourhood, which then gets approved through a local referendum. And this is a very popular new initiative. It's not new anymore. So now we have over 1,200 areas designated as neighbourhood planning areas, and 66 have passed the referendum. I think this was the figure from early March. Now there are 3 or 4 more that have passed that final stage. The community right to build is all about giving, again, local people the right to build on smaller sites through obtaining what's called a community right to build orders. And this is slightly less popular initiative because it's a bit more complex, it's a bit more technical for local people to do. So only 3 so far in England, but many more in the pipeline. The community right to bid is all about giving, again, local people the right to designate assets of community value. So it could be an important building or an important site or a public space, a green, a village green or something like that. So once that site or building is designated as being of community value, then the community has the first offer to purchase the site when it comes up for sale. And we're talking about sales, the assets that are in private ownership. And so far we have over 1,800 assets of community value listed in England. So again, this is significant stuff that's happening in England, and everywhere I go, people get really interested in all of this. And finally, we have the community right to challenge, which is about giving local people the right to challenge the local authority and take over council services if they think that they can do a better job, deliver a better service. And so far, 51 expressions of interest are submitted in England again, and 9 procurement processes triggered. So in 9 places, we now have local people taking over services. From my point of view, and probably most of you, the most important, the most interesting of all of these is the community right to plan. This is the new neighbourhood planning sort of thing. And through neighbourhood plans, local people can now add detail to the plans that are produced by local authorities. So for their specific neighbourhood, once it's designated as a neighbourhood planning area, they can decide what type of development should happen in their neighbourhood. They cannot use neighbourhood planning as NIMBY charter because the government was very careful not to actually allow that to happen, because we know that the coalition government is very pro-growth. So what they said is that neighbourhood plans have to comply with local plans produced by local authorities. So if a local authority sets a certain target, say number of homes to be built, the neighbourhood plan cannot go beyond that, below that target. It can go above the target, so it can add to growth numbers, if you like. Many of them include design policies, because people in many local areas, where at least where I worked in neighbourhood planning, are actually concerned about the quality, design quality of new developments. And many of the NIMBYs, what we call NIMBYs, are actually NIMBYs because they see substandard development happening in their backyard. So we're trying to convert NIMBYs into QUIMBYs. So instead of no development in my backyard, quality development in my backyard. So people are including, therefore, these design standards and design policies in their neighborhood plans in order to make sure that the new developments are of sufficient, good design standard. As I said, neighborhood plans have to comply with local authority plans and also some European legislation and national policies. We know that our national planning policy framework is now a very slim document. It's been reduced by coalition government from 1,500 pages to 50 pages. And it's all about making sure that new developments are sustainable developments. So very kind of loose policy framework for neighborhood plans, and they're still very, very attractive for local people to use as a tool for guiding and, in a way, controlling development in their local areas. So some stats from the department, again, from early March, many applications for the designation of areas. These are the ones that have passed that first step. This is how many reach the stage before they go to independent examination. And this is after the examination that many of them, 121, passed the independent examination. 62% of local authorities now have areas designated as neighborhood planning areas. And these local referendums, the neighborhood plans, once they go through examination, they go to local referendum, which is the first time a planning policy goes through local referendum. Again, quite significant change. 100% of them are successful. Average turnout, 32%. We'll see how many people we'll get on Thursday, but this is really good for local issue, 32%. Average yes vote, 88%. And it's important to say neighborhood plans have to have more than 50% yes votes to go through. And I think the most significant change introduced through neighborhood planning is this kind of change of attitude. And the department, they like to use this example, so I'm just using their slides. This is a place in Oxfordshire under a lot of development pressure. Many people opposed to growth, as you can imagine. And in a few years ago, 70% of residents said no to any new housing in their parish area. This is 2008. They've gone through the neighbourhood planning process where they've been in the leading role, supported by professionals that they can access through the support scheme, again funded by the government. Now 91% of residents say yes to a plan allocating land for 76 homes. It's not a great number, but this is a small place, small village. Across 5 sites, and turnout was 59%. So these are significant figures, and I think we all have a lot to learn from all of this. So this is the kind of the context for me applying for a grant from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust a couple of years ago and saying, I want to study this subject of community engagement, and I want to do that by going through very different places to Cuba. Cannot be more difficult in all sorts of ways than our country. And then going to New Zealand and Australia, they are much more sort of similar to what we have here, but planning context, planning system vary between New Zealand and Australia and our country. So this is exactly what I did. And I started last year in Havana, Cuba, and now I took part in an international charrette, which is another word for a design workshop, where I worked alongside about 20 urbanists and architects and developers from the United States, Mexico, and different countries from Europe. And we were trying to produce proposals for one particular area in Havana called El Vedado. And this was then to form part of a new emerging master plan for the city of Havana. And Havana is a fantastic case study for all town planners, I think. City of grids, you can see the development of the city by studying the grid of the city. City of fantastic public spaces, fantastic architecture from 15th, 16th century onwards, including some industrial architecture, some residential, even including some early modernist examples, quite unique, examples that not many people know about outside Cuba. And some even examples like this from the early days of the new government in the 1960s of post-revolution. But they were quickly stopped a couple of years after the revolution, and replaced by quite austere-looking Russian-style housing estates, I would say. So this is an example of the complex of 5 art schools on the outskirts of Havana, a project that started right after the revolution and then stopped due to lack of support, political support, and lack of funds 2 years after. So it's all of this rich heritage that's actually prompting local architects and urbanists to look at it and to make sure that those historic assets that make that city unique and beautiful are protected and enhanced, because the country is opening up slowly. I don't know if you've followed in the news recently, they're opening up slowly towards the United States and the rest of the world, and developers are now slowly starting to come in and bring investment into this country, most of which is in a derelict state at the moment, because no maintenance has been done to most of their buildings since the revolution. So it's literally some places are falling apart. But they are unique and they're really valuable architecturally and in terms of urbanism of the city. So this workshop was, in a way, our attempt to prepare a plan for the future, for the time when they have the influx of investment and developers coming into the country, to make sure that those important assets are protected and that there is a proposal how to develop certain parts of the city, but also to give the local architects and urbanists confidence to actually be able to negotiate with those new developers who will come to that country sooner or later. So it was engagement, but in a different way, engagement with local professionals. And then this year, actually I finished this tour two weeks ago. I went to Auckland and Christchurch in New Zealand, and I met a number of local authorities and development companies and practitioners, urban designers, planners, and then continued in Australia doing the same and giving seminars similar to this and engaging in debates with local planners and architects in how do you actually engage local communities. And I'm back now with this whole load of information and new ideas and methods and tools how to engage local people that I will be trying to summarize in a report for the Churchill Trust. It will be available on their website in about 3 or 4 months. So I've heard about all sorts of tools and methods that they use down there, and I'm just prepared a few slides. These are emerging ideas, my reflections of what I've heard, and all of this is actually applicable in our country, even though the context in planning terms, and in terms of how the professional sort of institutes and the professions act and implement these approaches to engagement in their countries. Because I don't believe when people say, you can't do this here because we have different contexts. Of course, there are different contexts, but we are all intelligent people and we can draw lessons that are applicable, and they can learn from other people's mistakes, but also how people react in terms of engagement is the same all over the world in terms of how they reflect to being engaged or informed and not being engaged, being part of a process or not being part of the process. So therefore, I think it's all kind of important, and it's all good lessons for us. So the first one is about, where do you go? How do you engage people? And it's about going to people rather expecting them to come to you to engage, and engaging them in the way that best suits those people. So the best example for that is this example from New Zealand, where they have many Maori tribes that they're trying to engage with, and they have a very good system of engaging with Maori tribes that's based on their protocols, social protocols. And they organize these special hui and mananga workshops where they engage people in a way that suits their social protocols. And that's based on the design principles that they developed and now built into the national and local design principle guides, and on Maori core values. And one of them in particular is about developing relationships through shared experiences and working together, which provides people with a sense of belonging. And I thought this is really a fantastic sort of base for developing an engagement strategy and approach. And we don't have as many Maoris in this country as they do have in New Zealand, but we have many social groups and ethnicities in this country, and I think it's important to engage them in the way that that suits their approaches to dealing with other people. So we can't expect, working people to turn up at an event which is organized on a Monday afternoon. We can't engage with young mothers, if we organize an event in the middle of the afternoon or in the evening when they're busy. So we have to go to people where they are rather than expect them to come to us if we want to engage them. Make sure there is a good representation and a robust governance structure. It's a kind of no-brainer. So it's about making sure that we don't have just the usual suspects. And I like this quote from Cobus Menz, who's an urban designer who works in Auckland, New Zealand. And he says, engage people with the greatest capacity to do something or to detract. So you have to engage the decision makers as well as those who may potentially sabotage the whole process. And it's important to engage them from the start. Because if you don't, it's going to backfire at some point during the process. We sometimes tend to forget that we ought to be engaging local elected members. And this is, again, something that I observed here through neighborhood planning. It's interesting to see how in some areas local members were very active and engaged with local neighborhood forums and were part of the neighborhood planning process throughout. In some areas, councillors saw it as kind of power struggle, so they felt that these new neighbourhood groups are taking away their decision-making powers, and there was a lot of friction between them. So, and I think local councils are elected there to represent their local constituents and to represent their local communities. And the sooner they engage with something like community-led planning or development processes, the better for them. And I think more and more of them are now realizing the value of engaging early. Always talk everyone through the rules of engagement. Again, people tend to forget that if you start an engagement process, you have to make sure that people understand the aims of that engagement, what's possible, what's not possible, and that everyone will have space and time to say what they want to say, but that you can't have one or two issues dominating the debate. And to have a balanced approach, it's important to have external, I think, independent facilitation of engagement processes. I use this also example from Australia that I have down here. In many places in Australia, what they use now is citizens' juries when they are deliberating about important community issues. So what it means is that they put together a jury, a panel of local people that's based on random sampling, stratified random sampling. That means they have almost scientifically sort of precise representation from different strata of the community, from different genders, from age groups, employed, unemployed people, people with who own their homes and people who rent, etc. So it depends on the type of issue that they're trying to solve. They have that approach to engagement through these panels, and on the other hand, they have the open and transparent engagement processes. And there is an interesting sort of debate between these different schools of thought in terms of what's more important. I think both models have their place, and it really depends on the type of issue that's been discussed and kind of the time scale and who's bringing forward the project or the initiative to decide which model to adopt. But it's something certainly for us to study, because I don't think, for instance, in neighbourhood planning in England, we've looked carefully enough at representation, proper representation of neighbourhoods within neighbourhood forums, because in many cases it's people with a bit more time on their hands who are getting engaged in these processes. And in New Zealand, again, an interesting model where they have these large councils. They had amalgamation of some of the councils recently, but they delegated a lot of decision-making power to these local boards, and they have elected representatives working alongside community representatives, they are deciding about key community projects and investment, importantly. So some of the important lessons for us and things that we could do over here. In many community projects, actually, the leading group is the board of trustees or the managing committee or some kind of smaller group of people that are doing most of the day-to-day work, and then they are disseminating, engaging the wider community. And very often kind of the makeup of that trust or that committee doesn't reflect really the aims or the needs of the project. And for many groups, it's very difficult to transition from the early days when they're mainly campaigning to do something to save a building or a site or introduce a new initiative to actually delivering the project. And it's very important for groups to have that kind of flexibility and to change as the project changes. And this is exactly what I observed in Melbourne. Abbotsford Convent is a huge project that was a site that was closed down as a convent many years ago, and it was owned by the state. And this local group of campaigners kept on their campaign for many years, I think over 2 decades, and eventually managed to negotiate with the state government to take over the ownership of the site. But because the group was made out of campaigners who are so happy to finally have the site, they accepted a deed that had in it very restrictive clauses, such as that they could never seek funding from the government, and a few other clauses that are now, a huge problem for them trying to operate this very big and complex site, and they are exhausting their, sources of funding and cannot go to the state government for more money because of that deed that was negotiated in the early days of their project. So it's important kind of for the board and for the leading group to move as the project moves on. Another lesson, this is what I've heard from a few people as I travel around, engage people in at least 3 different ways, and I think most of us do that these days. It's becoming very easy to engage people online through social media, through Have Your Say websites, through online mapping sites, surveys, mobile applications. On paper, this is the traditional way, through paper surveys, ideas cards, photo competitions, etc. Face-to-face, through workshops, very important. They use different models in Australia, like Inquiry by Design or World Cafe. They do a lot of picnics and barbecues where they engage people and walkabouts. But also, I've added this 4th one. This is about testing solutions by actually doing temporary changes on the ground and seeing how people use spaces. So an example from Auckland, where they've done exactly that. They wanted to test different proposals for this public space in Auckland waterfront, and they observed how people use these different parts of the public space, and then that informed their design brief. Some of the digital tools in use in Australia are produced by these companies. They have a huge range of online tools, and if you are interested in something like this, do look it up, and there's a huge amount of detail that they have on their website. Another really important point is to build capacity of people before to make sure that they can meaningfully engage in projects. And this is about, for instance, build capacity in terms of understanding the importance of physical environment and how it actually improves or it doesn't improve their quality of life. What is possible in terms of financially, technically, in terms of policy, what is their role as opposed to the role of other stakeholders in the process, what are the different mechanisms for achieving their goals. For instance, working with many neighborhood forums, some of them actually realized when they started the process that there are other ways of achieving what they want to achieve by, for instance, responding to planning applications or taking part in consultation on other policy documents rather than through neighborhood plan. Also for people to understand the need for flexibility, because if you're too prescriptive in your policy documents, in your strategies, that can actually stifle development, because developers do not like very prescriptive policy frameworks. So where do you draw the line? How flexible is your policy is really important. The importance of addressing difficult issues. There's no point in going around difficult issues and pretending that they're not there because they will come back at some point. So the best thing is to actually start addressing them from day one. And explaining to people how the process will unfold. And this is a process diagram that's used by, again, Cobusmans in New Zealand, where it's all very structured engagement of local stakeholders in smaller groups, then going out to a bigger group of people, engaging local elected members, and then bringing them all together in an inquiry by design workshop. Understanding trade-offs. Again, people have to understand that their move, their design decisions have impact in terms of viability of schemes, for instance. So this is an interesting example of a game that was developed by a group of urban designers in Queensland, and they engaged local elected members and local residents in designing this master plan for a town centre in a place in Gold Coast, where they were given the exact amount of green space and employment space, residential space, other community facilities that are required on that site to make it viable, and then they had to design the master plan based on those quantities of development, green space, etc. And it was very interesting actually that how different groups came up with different solutions and how they collectively then amalgamated all of these different options and decided what their preferred option will be. Don't engage unless committed to following through. Again, really important, because that's one of the key reasons why people become skeptical and negative about community engagement, because they put their time in and their ideas into a project, and then they see all of that forgotten, put on the shelf, and not really implemented through the project. So this is an example from Christchurch, a place that went through a very traumatic event, 3-4 years ago when they had the major earthquake. Now 80% of the city centre is still flat, all demolished after the earthquake, and they had a huge engagement exercise. They call it Share an Idea. This is one of the leaflets used for that, where they engaged over 10,000 people in generating ideas for the rebuilding of Christchurch. They had over 100,000 ideas generated by people over a relatively short period of time. This was almost like healing process for them. It happened, only 3 or 4 months after the earthquake. So all of that huge amount of work that was led by the city council was built into the city council-led master plan for the city centre, submitted to the government, and then the government minister rejected that proposal and instead set up an earthquake recovery authority and appointed them to produce a master plan for the city council. And even though this new authority tried to build as many ideas from this large exercise into their proposal, they haven't followed through actually in directly engaging people in more detailed proposal for certain spaces. So now they came up with a proposal for a major public space, Victoria Park, in the north-western corner of the city centre. And there was a public outcry because that wasn't one of the priorities that was identified by local people. They said there's nothing wrong with the park as it is, and it really is a very well-used local park. They said, why are you spending millions of dollars on this public space where there are other priorities for us in the city centre? And the backlash was so strong that the CERA, this Christchurch Earthquake Recovery Authority, decided to actually step back and start from scratch and look at that space again and engage people and develop new proposals for that whole corridor along the river. And this is now, they have permanent sort of presence in that park. They have engagement panels. They have people who access to these plans and proposals, and people can feed in their ideas. So this is about kind of follow through, because if you don't, you'll have a knock-on effect will be that your plans will be delayed and there will be a problem somewhere down the line. So that continuous engagement is actually what's needed. The feedback sort of cycle and the spin-offs from the engagement are important. This is just a diagram developed by banged the table there, online engagement people who produce a lot of tools for online engagement and have very interesting sort of online blogs and discussion forums. So again, if you're interested in this, look them up. And they summarize that kind of continuum, engagement continuum in this diagram. Engagement takes time, and we forget about that, and it's very difficult to maintain momentum because we're talking about volunteers, people who are giving their free time to, to engage in projects. So it's important to think about meanwhile uses and to keep that interest in projects, keep people engaged in some way, and no better place to study that than Christchurch again, where they had the earthquake, and they've done a huge amount of meanwhile use around the city. These have these container cities. This is their main shopping mall in the city centre. It's been so successful that they're now thinking about keeping it because it works well. The shops are there. It's busy. It's crowded all the time, and perhaps that money can be spent somewhere else. It's interesting to see what's going to happen with that. Elsewhere, for instance, again, an example from New Zealand, from Auckland waterfront, where they did a number of temporary sort of solutions for some of the public spaces around the waterfront. This is one of the playgrounds, and this was a temporary solution, to have something there to attract people and keep it busy while they're waiting for major development proposals to come through. Actually, this playground has been so well used and so busy and so popular that they've decided to keep it. So this is about kind of how do you keep people engaged as you go along, because as we know, projects can take anything from a few years to 15, 20 years. People lose interest. Face-to-face engagement in developing solutions is invaluable, and this is what I found everywhere, that yes, you can engage people online through paper surveys. In the early stages of projects, we're gathering ideas, so people can feed that in all sorts of ways, but actually in developing solutions, there's nothing better than locking people in the room and getting them to collectively to come up with proposals and solutions. And it's good for all sorts of reasons. Everyone has a say. You bring technical people together with lay people, and together they learn from each other. Technical people get the local knowledge from local residents and businesses, and lay people learn in terms of technical restrictions and technical solutions and possibilities from professionals. Bringing community together with the technical team builds their confidence and decision-making skills. It's an efficient way of doing projects because it condenses that time scale. Instead of going to different professions and doing stages, all of that is condensed in a few days, very intensive few days. And there's something about giving people a tight deadline. What I find in many of the workshops that I've been a part of, that kind of boosts people's creativity, and they kind of focuses their mind of being positive and finding solutions to problems rather than complaining about problems. So it turns them into proactive rather than reactive parties. Make it fun, and Australians and New Zealanders are really good at this. They like their barbecues. They have slightly better weather than we do, so they do a lot of this outdoor stuff: picnics, barbecues, walkabouts. And I think we should be doing more of this. And it's very easy it's easier to engage people if you do something like this. But they also do serious stuff. I mean, they do, as part of these picnics and barbecues, they have these exhibitions, and they get people's idea. They get really people engaged in serious issues. And this is kind of my concluding thoughts going towards the end of my presentation. We may start engaging people on a specific issue, on a specific project, but actually, ultimately, it's about creating stronger, more active communities, and it's about, making local people happier in the end. And I'm using, again, an example from New Zealand. This is a place, one of the neighborhoods in Auckland, where local residents saw an opportunity with a piece of leftover space that's at the entrance to their neighborhood, opposite this wall. And they actually got together in that street and created a butterfly garden where locals can get together and spend some leisure time. And then, started looking at other potential projects in their neighborhood. There's this huge retaining wall. There's a, highway just beyond it. and they start to fundraising to actually create something much nicer at this entrance to their neighborhood. So they created this huge mural. And then they started looking at how to improve this tunnel. This is a pedestrian tunnel underneath the highway, so they've done that. Then they started looking at other local issues. So, it's kind of snowballing effect of these community-led initiatives. It helps some of the local residents actually cope with illnesses, I've been told. It actually got the whole community together. Some people who never met each other, never worked together, now they know each other, they work much better as a local group. So it's those kind of knock-on effects that are really important. It's not only about the particular project, it's about the effect, the long-term effect on local communities. So I think that proper community engagement benefits all. It benefits local people because they get what they want. They're able, they get the opportunity to prioritize issues in their area. It works for the landowner or the private sector, private developer, because the biggest problem that they normally have is delays to their projects caused by unhappy local residents or local businesses. So the sooner they can get to a position where they know with more certainty what's acceptable in that area, the better for them. So now I think many developers are now waking up to this fact, and many of them are now realizing the value of engaging people early on in their projects. And of course it works for local authorities as well, because in many cases they get a list of priorities for investment, for their budgets, for their running budgets. So for instance, this is really important in terms of neighborhood planning. Each neighborhood plan that I worked on has at the end of it an implementation plan and a wish list. What the local people in that neighborhood think should be improved and what should be funded by local authorities. So we're talking about public realm improvements, street schemes, or particular buildings and sites owned by the local authority. And local authorities like that because they have to go through community engagement to get to those investment plans anyway. So in this way, they get something already prepared by local people for them. But, community engagement is complex. Sometimes it's very difficult, sometimes very emotional. It's not easy to do. In order to ensure that that process is positive and as constructive as it can be, that all requires adequate technical support and facilitation, independent facilitation, I find. Capacity building, as I said, you have to bring people to the level where they can meaningfully engage. And it requires a simple and effective process. How do you bring people through the different stages of engagement? So I'm finishing with this Chinese proverb which says, tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand. And that's exactly what I've been describing through those different types of projects. It's when you actually engage people directly in generating proposals, they will understand what can be done. And I'm finishing with this guy again, because this all needs a lot of patience and a lot of persistence. So I'm saying never, never, never give up. All right, thank you.